Welcome to SwiftUI Fundamentals. In this video, I'm going to talk about, what we're going to learn in this course and how we're going to learn it and kind of the overall flow. First up, this was designed for people who at least have the basics of Swift down. You don't have to be a Swift pro, but at least know the basics. And if you don't know the basics, check out iOS Dev Launchpad. We go over all that. So this course is meant to build your foundation in SwiftUI and focus on what I believe is the core skill, and that is moving data around. SwiftUI is declarative, which is quite different from the imperative programming paradigm we all may be used to with UIKit, right? It kind of flips it on its head. You have to completely think about things differently, right? It's a mindset shift. And that mindset shift and properly passing data between views, that's what I want to focus on in this course. Yes, SwiftUI can do a lot of awesome animations, crazy cool UI stuff, but again, I want to focus on the foundation of building apps, and to me, that is passing the data and getting your app to act how you want it to, right? I say that all the time. When I first learned SwiftUI, getting my app to look like I wanted to, right, with just building the UI, to me, that was the easy part. Where I ran into frustrations and headaches was passing data and getting my app to act how I wanted. So that's what I want to be the focus of this app. Fun, cool UI and animations, that can and will come later. All right, so how is this course going to work? Let's talk about the flow. Overall, we're going to build 4 apps. It's going to start off pretty easy, but we're going to progressively get more difficult and build over time to where the final app is a bit complex, for a foundational course. And I'm going to introduce concepts slowly at first, and we'll get a lot of practice, building with them, using them, because as you know, I'm a big believer in practice, repetition. You don't just read one article or watch one video on a topic and then you know it. You got to practice, practice, practice. But we do start off pretty easy. So if you do have a little bit of SwiftUI experience and after the first 2 apps, you're like, oh man, this is super basic. Just wait. But okay, let's talk about those apps. So the first one is just the UI of a weather app. This is the introduction to the course. So we start off super basic. I want to get you familiar with the foundational tools in just building UI in SwiftUI. After that introductory app, I go into more of an explainer session, some talking head, graphical videos, where I explain, imperative versus declarative and the differences. I talk about how SwiftUI updates its views in the view tree hierarchy, talk about view modifiers, view builders, right? We kind of dive into the core concepts of explaining, but then we get back to code in the next app. It's about Apple frameworks, where as you can see, there's a grid. You can tap on a framework, learn more about the framework. So not only will you learn how to build this kind of app, but hopefully you'll get inspired by reading about these frameworks and maybe get your next big app idea. But in that app, as you can see, we're adding a couple screens. We're starting to dip our toes into passing data from screen to screen. Like I said, we ease into it and get progressively more difficult. Now, the third app, all about the barcode scanner, this really focuses on UIKit integration with SwiftUI, right? Because, SwiftUI is pretty new. A lot of stuff still isn't built in, such as the camera, like we see in this app. And this app focuses on passing data from UIKit to SwiftUI when you have to integrate UIKit. That's using UI View Controller Representable in coordinators to pass all the data. So the whole point of this app is to get you used to using that, because if you're building apps in SwiftUI, it's very likely that you're going to have to go to UIKit for some things. And finally, we finish off with the more complex app, well complex for a foundational course, where you can order appetizers, see a detail view of it, add it to your cart or your order, and then place your order. To be clear, I don't want to have any misconceptions. We're not implementing Stripe and actual payment processing. That's a bit outside the scope of this course, but I don't want there to be any wrong expectations. Now this app, besides what you see, we're going to deal with network calls in this app. So we're going to do proper error handling, alerts, some advanced animations. So again, this is where it gets a little more complex, above what we did in the previous apps. And during each of these apps, we're going to be refactoring along the way. We're going to be talking about project organization, and I'll be providing various levels of challenges after each app if you do want to push yourself further and further to build upon the base, of what these apps give you. After we build the 4 apps, we're going to have a review section. And I think this is going to be a very valuable section because it's part of the learning process, right? You're going to hear me talk about it. We're going to get a chance to build and play with it a couple times, right? But once you've seen it in action, you've actually touched it. And then now if you go back and review it, I feel like that's going to really solidify your knowledge and just really drive it into your head. And then lastly, my final disclaimer. The only thing I can promise you is that SwiftUI is going to change, right? So don't treat this course as the final end all be all of your Swift foundation, right? I want to give you those foundational skills so that you can easily grow and evolve and adapt as this world of SwiftUI changes and evolves itself. So just keep that in mind. things are probably going to change, but hopefully you leave this course with a solid foundation so you can change with it. This course has been updated for iOS 15 and iOS 16. This course is structured into 4 apps, and I did the updates at the end of each app. For example, the first app you'll do is the weather app. So at the end of the weather app, there's a what's new in iOS 15, and then there's a what's new in iOS 16, and then the same thing for each app after that. I put the updates at the end of the app so you could still see the old way, because a lot of apps have to support older versions of iOS, iOS 14, iOS 15. So if I just redid everything for only iOS 16 and above, well, you're missing out on how to do things the old way, which you may need. I also think it's good for you to see the evolution of how things change and how we go about updating projects, as new iOS versions come out. So if you're going through this course for the very first time, and before you get to those iOS 15 and iOS 16 sections, you see some deprecations or Xcode warnings, don't worry, wait till you get through the updated for iOS 16 version, we will address those. You'll also see some what's new in Xcode videos, I believe Xcode 13 and Xcode 14, and that's because Xcode itself is changing and evolving over time. So again, if you're going through the first time, you see something weird or different in Xcode, make sure you check out those what's new in Xcode videos to help you out. Over the next few videos, I'm going to introduce you to SwiftUI by building this weather app. Well, at least the UI for the weather app. Now, as I said in the course overview, if you remember, the purpose of this app is to not give you the full deep explanations all right away. The purpose of building this app is to show you SwiftUI in action, give you a light introduction to it. So as I'm going through this app, if you're not quite following everything or I'm moving too quickly, that is by design. Because again, I want you to see it, because when I give deeper explanations in future videos, I think that will make it easier for you to understand what I'm talking about, right? If I just dove right into those deep explanations right away and you hadn't seen it in action, it's going to be like confusing. But if you've seen it in action, then I give the deep explanation, I think you'll be able to connect those two and actually understand what's going on. Not to mention, this is going to be the first of a couple apps we build in the course, and we're going to be doing all this a lot. You're going to get plenty of practice and repetition. So again, like I said in the intro, the flow of this course over those apps is the first app may be confusing. The second app, you're going to start to get it. By the third and fourth app, hopefully you're typing this stuff out before I even say it. That's the goal. That's what I want out of this course. So that's my disclaimer. And again, try to refrain from asking like specific questions on these videos in the comments, because I'm very likely going to answer those in the videos after we build this weather app. Again, the whole point of this is just for you to see it in action. All right, let's start building. So open up Xcode, create a new Xcode project, and I'll make this full screen here. No, Siri, not you. Okay, so right away you see you have a couple options when building a SwiftUI app, like just an app. Well, you can also click multi-platform, but here's the thing. In the early Xcode 12 betas, when you clicked on multi-platform, which would give you macOS, iOS, iPadOS, that stuff, you used to be able to create an app here. Well, in the release of Xcode 12, it's gone, and allegedly it's back in the Xcode 12.2 beta. So if you're doing this later, you might see it in Xcode 12.2 and beyond, but you should be able to create a multi-platform app. That's one of the features of SwiftUI. So for now, because I am on Xcode 12.1, just click app for iOS and hit next. And I'm going to name this Swift UI-weather. You can name it whatever you want. That's what I'm going to name it. And make sure you have SwiftUI as the interface checked and the lifecycle SwiftUI app. Don't worry about core data or tests. We're not there yet. Go ahead and hit next and save it wherever you like. I'm going to put it on my desktop for now. And here we are. This is what a SwiftUI Xcode interface looks like. Now your preview may not be up and running like mine isn't, so hit resume. And this is kind of what is nice about SwiftUI is you get this hot reloading. Now, in theory, that's what you're supposed to get. Oftentimes the preview acts kind of finicky. Sometimes it's slow, as you're seeing. This is on an iMac Pro, still going a little slow. So to be quite honest, when I'm actually building my apps in SwiftUI, I'm like rarely using the preview and only for very specific like screens. But again, SwiftUI is so new, I expect previews to improve a lot over the coming years. First of all, we don't want an iPad Touch 7th generation. Let's go to the iPhone 12 Pro, the new hotness. Okay, here we are, and you can adjust the size here. Now, what I'm gonna show you here is how you can visually edit code, but I'm only showing this to you out of what I feel is kind of an obligation to at least let you know it exists, because I never use it. I recommend you don't use it, because once you learn how to just like write the code, it's 10 times faster. You can be so much more productive. But I want to show you this exists, and maybe it'll help you when you're first learning, but I don't recommend getting used to doing this and making this like the way you do things. But before I dive into that, let's actually break down what's going on over here in our content view. So SwiftUI is all about views. I'll dive more into that later. But every view you create is going to return a body and it's going to return a view. So right now, our content view has a property called body and it's returning text, hello world. And that's what you see here. So that's what's going on right now. And of course, we're going to build a lot more code in there to expand on that. But let me get back to this preview real quick, just to show you this so I can get it out of the way. So if you do Command-Shift-L, you can kind of pull up your modifiers. Now, more on modifiers later, but it's kind of how you customize a view. Again, we're going to do a deep dive into modifiers with its own dedicated video. So right now, just know this is how you kind of customize a view or drag a view on there. So let's say we want a button below our hello world text over here. Well, if you're using the preview, you can just literally drag that button and you can see where you put it. You can put it below it, above it, to the left of it, to the right of it. Now, this is where stacks come in, and stacks are very fundamental to SwiftUI. We're going to be using them so much, they're going to be second nature by the time we may even be done with this first video, but definitely by the time we're done with the course, stacks are going to be second nature to you. So if you're a little confused now, don't worry. But you can see the little message at the bottom. Adding a button to the new horizontal stack along with existing text. And if I move it to the bottom, it says adding a button to a vertical stack along with existing text. So let's add it to the bottom and create a vertical stack or a V stack. So now what you see happen is the button is in this vertical stack, which is that red outline, that's the frame of it. So you got the hello world text and a button. Now the cool thing, kind of cool, right? You dropped it on your preview and look what happened in the code. The code automatically popped in. It popped up a V stack with, here's our text that we had, and then it put a button below in the V stack. So that is pretty cool. I'm not gonna lie. When you see just drag and dropping and it makes the code for you, you're gonna think, wow, that's an awesome way to do it. That's great. It's great for like little small stuff. It's cool. Yeah, trust me, you're going to be just wanting to write code more often than not. Now, all right, let's do this one more time. Command-Shift-L to pull up your library. And let's drop another text into this, except now we're not going to drop it. So I could drop it here to just add it into the V stack that we have, the vertical stack. But let's try something different. Let's put it to the left to create a new horizontal stack, an H stack, right? So I drop it there. Boom, see placeholder for the text. And then, so here's the horizontal stack, right? You got the placeholder on the left and then our V stack. So you can like nest your stacks as you're seeing. So the V stack of hello world and button is now on the right of the H stack. And you can see this here, right? The whole thing is wrapped in this H stack. And then to the left of the H stack is the text. And then we have our V stack here to the right. So again, you can see you can nest H stacks and V stacks. Now that's all I'm going to show you for the drag and drop again, because I don't recommend using that, but I felt like I needed to show that off. Now let's take a look at the design, and I'm going to break down the H stacks, the V stacks, and the Z stacks, haven't talked about that yet, of this design to hopefully, make you start understanding how these stacks work. Because again, this is like fundamental to SwiftUI. You're going to be writing a million stacks throughout your career. So looking at the design, the elements on the screen that are on top of the background color is one big V stack, right? So as you can see in this outline, the city name, Cupertino, the icons, everything is within a V stack. But like I mentioned, you can nest other stacks in that. For example, the weather icon that we have, the cloud and the sun, and the 76 degrees, like that in and of itself is its own V stack nested within the overall V stack. And down here, you can see we have individual V stacks, right? Of the day of the week, like Tuesday, the weather icon, and the temperature. That in and of itself is a V stack, but it's nested within the overall H stack that is the days of the week going across. And again, that itself is nested within the overall V stack. And then of course we have the button at the bottom of the V stack there. So hopefully that gives you an example of, how these stacks works, the H stacks and the V stacks. And again, we're going to build this, so you're going to get more in-depth knowledge, but that's it on the surface. And then the Z stack that I haven't talked about is kind of like vertical layers, right? So for example, the V stack that holds all the elements is on top of our background view, which is the color gradient, right? So that is the Z stack, and that's kind of like vertical view hierarchy, if you will. So that covers the three main types of stacks. Again, we're going to build this, so you're going to get more knowledge, and we're going to build a bunch more apps with them. So let's get to it. All right, so back what we were messing with before, one thing you can do when you're not using the drag and drop preview is get rid of this pane on the right. That'll give you more room. I like to make my canvas a little smaller. If you want the mini map, cool. I tend to not. I think the mini map's super cool. I just never use it. So I click it off because again, I like screen real estate. But let me show you something real quick. And this is why I prefer the code way. Like I can go from an H stack to a V stack like in a second just by deleting H to V, and now you can see it changed. So again, I find code so much quicker. And again, this V stack, let's change it to an H stack. Literally by changing one letter in your code, it changes the layout of your screen. So that is the power of like doing it via code. So one little tip there. That's why I like that. So on that note, we're gonna have remember I said the whole thing is a Z stack. So I'm gonna make that a Z stack, and you can see it put everything on top of each other, not what we want. So let's delete all of this here, because the first thing we're gonna build in our Z stack is our background. And if you look at the design again, look at the background, it's a nice gradient color for the background. So the first thing we want to do is actually make a color. Now a color is a view, like everything in SwiftUI is a view. Again, I'll be saying that all throughout the course. So let's do color.blue, right? Bam. Okay, so you can see in the color, it fills the entire space available, which is everything but the safe area. But you notice on our designs, like we don't want to respect the safe area for a background. We want to fill the whole view. How we can fix that is by adding a modifier onto our color to say .edges, ignoring safe area, all. As you can see in our preview, that fills up the whole phone. And we put that on our color view because that's the view we want to ignore the safe area. When we actually put our content in there, we want to respect the safe area for that. But our background, ignore the safe area. Now that demonstrates color, how it fills everything up. However, our designs call for a gradient, not just a solid color. For that, we can create a linear gradient. So as you type linear gradient, there you go. Let's get our initializer here. You can see it takes in a gradient, a start point, and an end point. So there it gives us default values there, so you can start to see how quickly that comes in. So for our gradient here, we want an array of colors. So let's do, we want .blue, and then .white, right? Because this is kind of like the blue sky thing that we're looking for. Not blue, white. All right, so you see blue, white. Now starting point is leading and trailing. So you can see the gradient starts in the leading, which is on the left here, and it goes to the right. However, we want dot, and you can just hit dot to see all your options here. We want top leading, because we kind of want it to come down from the right? And then dot bottom trailing is what we want. We kind of want that angle there. Right, so there you go. So it starts in the top left, goes down to the bottom right, and we get kind of that like blue sky look. Now, gradients are nice and flexible, right? If you wanted to get kind of crazy with it, right, we have an array of colors here. You can add as many colors to this array that you want. And again, I don't want to get too wrapped up in like every detail about the UI, but I thought this was pretty cool to share. So I can do .blue, .red, .white. I guess that's pretty patriotic. Didn't even mean to do that, but you know, let's add a green in there, right? Just to really drive the point home here. Green, comma. Not semicolon, comma. Damn, Mike's in the way. So you can see, you can get kind of crazy with the gradients just by adding colors to the array, setting a start point, setting an end point, and SwiftUI does the rest. So that's just one little taste of like kind of the powerful stuff SwiftUI can do. And there's so much of that, and I did dabble in it here. But remember, the point of this course is to really focus on like the passing of the data and understanding how SwiftUI works. You could do like 7 courses on all the cool UI stuff you can do, but that's not the focus of this one. So that's as far as we're gonna go on like playing around with cool stuff, at least right away. So we just want the blue and the white for our gradient. And we're actually going to create a custom color for light blue because the white is like too much, but that's going to come later. And quick note, you'll notice in SwiftUI, a lot of times has very long like initializers. So a style that I've adopted, and many people already did this, but a style that I've adopted on the long ones is to start basically, you know, lining up my parameters vertically like that for my views. And you'll see me do that throughout the course, and it really depends on how long, you know, the initializer is. So as you can see, our background gradient is set up in our Z stack. So the next thing we need to do is start building that overall V stack on top of our background linear gradient. And we're going to do that in the next video. We left off last video getting our background gradient all set up. Well, now we're going to start the process of building the rest of the UI elements to eventually get to the final product that you see there. And we're just going to go top to bottom. So first, let's start with the city name that we want to put in there. Okay, so back to our code. As a recap, we have our Z stack with a linear gradient. Now remember, Z stack is kind of like vertical, view hierarchy, layers, if you will. Remember, we said all the UI elements are held within one V stack back when I went over that last video. So here, this is where now we're going to start typing the code, not dragging and dropping. Go ahead and start typing V stack, get autocomplete here, open and close bracers. There we go. There's our V stack. You don't see it yet because nothing's in there. Now we want the city name, right? So that is a text. Text is a view that takes in a string. So we want to do Cupertino, California. It's Apple's headquarters. Now you'll notice it is dead center of the screen, no styling, That's not where we want it. That's not what we want it to look like. So first up, let's get it looking how we want, right? And that comes with modifiers. Again, more on modifiers later. But one thing to note about modifiers as you're adding multiples, now you may be used to UIKit where you would say, UI view.background color equals red. You're telling that view to make its background color red. SwiftUI is a little different in that every modifier wraps the previous view in another view. I know that sounds confusing. Again, we're gonna dive into that later. So just remember that modifiers are a whole nother view wrapping the existing view. So when I do font and I do .system, here we go, we're gonna get size, we'll do 32, font weight, medium, and design is .default. So that just wrapped the text view in another view, with the font and the system stuff. Same thing when I do foreground color, right? We're gonna make it white. .foreground color .white, right? There you go, now you're seeing it update. So again, it's getting wrapped in another view. And the reason that is important, and you'll understand that the more you get practice as we go through the course, is the order of the modifier matters. Now, if I do .background color and do color .red, you can see the background is red. Now watch, okay? So that is a view. Now I'm gonna wrap that view in a frame. All right, so let's do .frame, because you can define the frame, and we'll just do a 200 by 200 frame. So now you see on my preview here, you can see the red outline that represents my frame. That's just because I have this line highlighted, by the way, that red outline's not gonna be there. Let me highlight the text view, or let me highlight the linear gradient, right? So you can see that's what that red outline means on the preview. Whatever you have selected, it's gonna show you kind of the details of it. So by clicking on the text, you can see I have a 200 by 200 frame. However, my background color didn't fill the frame because I put the frame on after I did the background color, right? We wrapped it in a frame, but it already had its background color. So that was a very simple example, but the main thing to take away here, and again, we're gonna get plenty of practice with this, is that the order of your modifiers matter because your modifiers are basically wrapping the existing view in another view. And the reason SwiftUI can do that is because views are so cheap in SwiftUI. They get destroyed and recreated all the time. More on that in more detail, right? I don't want to get too into the weeds right now, but I wanted to point out the order of modifiers matter and what modifiers are really doing. Okay, so let's delete that example here. And now we have our text looking like we want it to, right? That Cupertino, California. It's not in the location we want. And let's talk about why. Because a VStack, right, is only going to take up as much space as it needs. If I click on the VStack to highlight it in red on my preview, look how big my VStack is. Only as large as the text is, right? So if you want that VStack to stretch, there's a view called a spacer, right? So if I put a spacer below the text, it's gonna push it all the way to the top. So what that means is basically the VStack now is the whole length of the screen, essentially. However, the text is only taking up that top part, and the rest of the space below the text is the spacer. So strategically using spacers to move your UI around is often how you lay out your UI. And you can get real custom with it. You can set a custom height or width on the spacer. More on that later. Just know that spacers will kind of fill the entire space. So that's kind of what we want. However, Cupertino, California is hugging the notch a little bit too much. So another modifier we can put on text is padding. So I can do .padding. This is kind of like a default thing all the way around. And now you can see my red outline on the text has some padding in it, right? It's not hugging the Cupertino, California text so tightly because it has padding around it. So now with that padding, our city name is spaced how we want it, right? It's not hugging the notch too much. And again, you can do padding 100. Okay, now look at the padding I added. That's not what we want, of course, but I want to point out that the padding is flexible. You can do padding only on the bottom, space 200, right? And you'll see now there's only padding on the bottom. So padding is pretty flexible. Now, one thing I want to show you before we end this video is one thing you'll notice when working with SwiftUI is that the list of parameters is often very flexible. Like you just saw that I was able to do dot bottom, dot top with a comma. It almost looked like I was making up my own parameters. Well, let me show you why that is. If you command click on padding, go to jump to definition. Sure, I'm trying to get to the documentation here. Okay, so here we are. Here's the padding implementation, right? Well, what SwiftUI does a lot, not all the time, but you'll see this a lot, is it sets default values for its parameters. So you can see the edges set is equal to all, and the length is equal to nil. So when they give default values, what that means is if you don't include that parameter, it's going to default to the default value, of course. So you'll see that a lot in SwiftUI, where the parameters are often very, very flexible. And I know that confused me at first. I was like, wait a minute, like I can pretty much write whatever I want in the parameter. How do I know what I can and what I can't? And then when you dig into the documentation here, basically it reveals whys, because they set default values for a lot of things. So it's very flexible, which I like. All right, back to our code here. So like I said, the spacer is filling up. Sometimes you have to hit resume. As you see, previews can be finicky sometimes. So if you see that resume button, make sure you hit it so your previews are up to date. So now, like I said, the spacer is filling up the whole space. Obviously, we're going to add more elements in here with a VStack. If you go back to the design, now we're going to add our cloud sun icon or whatever weather you want to pick. Put that icon there and the temperature. And that's going to be its own VStack. But in order for me to get that nice looking icon, like that is an SF symbol. So I want to introduce you to SF symbols, show you how to download that and get you started using that, because we're going to use that in a lot of the apps the rest of the course. All right, SF symbols. Well, this is SF symbols 2 at the moment. Maybe it's 3 by the time you're taking this, who knows? Anyway, SF symbols were introduced in 2019, kind of when SwiftUI came out. And as you can see here, it's just a bunch of built-in iconography that Apple provides, and they are awesome. If you haven't used them yet, I think you're going to learn to love them. We're going to use them throughout the course. But the flexibility here, so this is like the official developer site. This is the human interface guidelines site. I'll link to both of these in the description, but to be honest, if you just Google SF symbols, these are the top 2 results, or click the link, whatever you want to do. So here's the human interface guidelines on SF symbols. So you can see they're nice, multicolored. There's 2,400 of them. They're great. They're built into Xcode, free to use. If you've ever struggled to find icons for your app, you know the struggle. That's why these are awesome. Another cool thing is like they have like font weights attached to them. They adapt to dynamic type. They're just great. And by font weights, you can see here, right? An ultralight version of the icon all the way to like a heavy, bold version and everything in between. So they're very flexible, support dynamic type. They're awesome. I'm so happy Apple, started doing this. And again, it's only year 2 in existence and they're already at 2,400. I just imagine that they're going to get better and better and better over time. For example, new in 2020, they announced colored icons. Before it was just monochrome, just one color. You could change like the tint color. It didn't have to be black or white. You can make it any color, but it was all monochrome. Well, now there's like multicolored icons. So that's great. So let me show you how to download it. Again, back to this one, the Apple developer website, not the human interface guidelines. If you scroll down a little bit, make sure you download SF Symbols 2. Not SF Symbols 1.1, because SF Symbols 2 has, 750 new symbols, and it got the multicolored symbols, which we're going to use for our cloud, right? Remember, the cloud was white, the sun was yellow. That's an example of a multicolored SF symbol that we're going to use. So once you got that downloaded and you open it up, and I made it full screen, again, here's all 2,400 icons, right? And you see the categories on the left, but we'll tap on gaming, just an example. So you got all these controller icons, D-pads, buttons, transportation, all kind of cars, planes, cool. So any topic you want over here, click on multicolor. You can click there, or you can click this little color wheel to get the multicolor. Now, you're gonna see most of mine are red. This is because that is my Mac accessory color. If you haven't, I get asked this all the time about my Xcode, how I made it red. If you go into general, quick little tip here, general settings, highlight color, red, accent color, red. You can pick any color you want. Watch when I change this to green. Look, now all my icons are green. So that means whatever system color that the user has, that's what's gonna show on these multicolored icons, at least the ones that have that. So anyway, now you can start to see our weather ones that we're going to use. Here's the cloud and the sun. But again, play around in SF symbols, scroll. You can see there's a ton of cool ones, literally 2,400 of them. So how to use SF symbols, we'll get into in the next video. I'm going to show you actually how. Basically, you just copy and paste this name right here, like docphil_badge.plus. And there's a way to copy paste. We'll talk about that. But I wanted to use this video to introduce you to SF symbols, show you how to download it, and definitely download it. Don't just watch this video, because we're going to be using this all throughout the course. So get this downloaded and let's move on to the next video. Now that we got SF symbols downloaded, we're back in our project. Pulling up the design again, what we're going to create right now is our VStack with our main weather icon and the temperature. We're going to focus on that for this video. So looking back at our code, right, we have our overall Z stack, and then we have our overall V stack, which again holds all our elements. Right now, all we have is our text that you see at the top there, and our spacer, which fills that up. So we are going to keep the spacer at the bottom and add another VStack, because the VStack is going to hold, again, our SF symbol and our temperature text. So an SF symbol is an image. So if we type image And then here's the thing, like image has a couple different initializers. If you do image name, this would be like just an image in your bundle, like you would have in your UI kit, right? Where you do UI image named string, right? That's the same thing here. However, if we type system name, this gives us our SF symbols, right? So now I need a string. Well, what string do I need? That's where we need to open up SF symbols to find out. So I'm going to tab over to SF symbols, and here we are. I'm in my multicolored section. Again, now we're down to the weather. Again, this cloud.sun.fill is what we want. So you can either type in that string, or if you tap on it and do Command-Shift-C, so just like Command-C to copy, but add a shift in there, Command-Shift-C to copy, that will copy the string. And if we Command-Tab back to Xcode and do a Command-V to paste that in, there you go, cloud sun fill. There it is on the right, exactly how we want it. No, it's not. So, all right. So we didn't get multicolor. We just got this very small, black icon. That's not what we want. Okay, so first let's handle getting the multicolored. So what you need to do there, you need to do rendering mode and then pass in .original. That'll give us the multicolor. There you go. It's still super small, as you can barely see probably, but at least we got the color combo we're looking for. Now, images, when you bring them into SwiftUI, you'll notice like if you bring in like an actual image like from your phone or something like that, it'll blow up to like its actual size. So pretty much all the time, you're gonna wanna make your images resizable, put that modifier. So now when you do that, bam, now it's huge because it's filling up all that space. We don't want that either. So we wanna put a frame around our image to give it like a fixed size. So again, down here, let's add another modifier to our image, .frame width and height. So let's do 180 by 180. And I get asked this all the time when I kind of do tutorials, like, oh, where'd you come up with those numbers? And I'm not doing it on the video, but the honest answer is like, I guess the number, okay, that's too big. And I just slowly tweak it over time to dial it in. So you're gonna see that a lot throughout the course where I just throw out these numbers. Just know that it took a lot of trial and error to like dial it into that number, which is nice in SwiftUI, because look, I can say, hey, 180 or 180 or 80 by 80. And real quick, instantly, I can like get a feel for it. So again, just trial by error. So if you don't know these numbers off the top of your head, neither did I just figured it out. Okay, so there's our frame. It doesn't quite look right. Our cloud and sun is more of a landscape type image, right? It's not a perfectly square aspect ratio. And it kind of looks like it's stretching a little bit to fix our square. But we don't want to like adjust our frame. We want our 180 by 180 because if we go back to SF symbols, a lot of these other symbols are a square. So we want to keep our frame a square. We just want to keep the aspect ratio of the image. So there's a modifier. We'll put it below resizable, .aspect ratio, content mode, and we can do .fit. There you go. So that keeps the aspect ratio, but fits it within our 180 by 180 frame. And now you can see that doesn't look like a stretched out image anymore. That's the image we want. So now that we have that, we need to add our text. Again, let's stay in the VStack, right? In our little nested VStack here. So now we want text of, again, a string to say 76. And if you do Option Shift 8, that'll give you the degree symbol. I had to look that up. I didn't know that either. So as you can see in the text, same thing that happened with our image. It's the black color. It's small. It's not exactly how we want it. So again, let's start adding our modifiers. So add our font here. Now, one thing about the way I'm adding font, and we're not going to get into this at the moment. So I do .system. So when I do system size and weight, that is giving me the San Francisco font, which is like the default Apple font. And the other thing is this won't support dynamic type. We're basically hard coding the font size. And one, dynamic type is way too much to get into for this initial app. But two, our city label and our degrees here, we want to be really big. Like they're already big. So they don't really need to support dynamic type because they're already huge. So we want to make this size 70, right? Told you it was huge. And then .medium font weight. And you can play around with this if you want it super bold, if you want it ultra thin, make your own, play around. We can delete that because again, that's one of those default value parameters that I talked about with padding. So again, we have our 76 degrees looking how we want it. We just don't have the color. So again, .foreground color, .white. There we go. Okay, so we're starting to see this come together a little bit. Now, one final touch I want to put on this VStack that has our icon and our temperature in it is you notice there's a lot of space in between there. So there's a couple ways we can do this, right? We could add a spacer here with a very small frame in between. Maybe we could add some padding with a negative number. That's a little hacky. However, VStacks also have parameters. So do HStacks and all that stuff. So if I do the initializer here, you can see I have alignment, spacing, and content. So you can align everything to the left, align everything to the right, or you know, as an example, and then we can set a spacing. So we're gonna use a spacing parameter here. And again, because we can pick and choose parameters because they're all default values on the other ones. So spacing, let's make an 8. Again, I just kind of dialed this in. And you saw the 76 get pushed up a little bit closer to the cloud. And that looks about right. And the reason it's not even a little closer is because remember, the cloud and the sun is kind of like a landscape, right? We had to make it aspect fit. So our frame of our image, if you look, is actually more, right? So when we put a square image in there, it's actually going to fill it up. So something to keep in mind is some images may not all have the right aspect ratio. So for an example, and I just have this memorized, to be honest with you, I can do sun.max.fill, and that'll give me the big sun. And it's always good to like test your UI with multiple images if they're dynamic like these. So now we can see when it's like full bright sun, maybe it's a little cramped. Maybe I want to add spacing to 10 on my VStack there to bump it out a little bit. You can dial this in. Let's go back to cloud.sun.fill. And there you go. So again, something to think about with SF symbols is they may not all have the same aspect ratio when you use them. Okay, now before I move on to the next video, I want to point something out, right? Here's our overall Z-stack. You can see that we're adding all these elements, right? The text, the image here. It's starting to grow a little bit. And you can imagine as we add our HStack with all the other VStack views, right, that you see on the design here, we add our button, this could get a bit unruly. Now, in later videos of this weather app, I'm going to go back and refactor and show you another cool thing about Swift UI is how you can really structure your code and make your view very readable, right? Because you can imagine if this was much longer, it'd be kind of hard to read. There's a lot going on. We're going to fix that in a future video, but I'm going to lay out all the UI first so you can see what it's like when it's all laid out, and then we're going to refactor it. All right, on to the next one. In this video, we're going to build this HStack of day views, whatever you want to call it, that has each individual day with the different weather icons. But we're going to start this video with your very first challenge. I know it's a little early, we're just getting started, but it's very similar to what we just did. So the challenge here, and just pause the video real quick, is to create this VStack that has the day of the week at the top, the icon in the middle, and then the temperature at the bottom. And like I said, just pause the video real quick because I'm going to get right into actually building it together. You can check your answer then, or if you don't want to do the challenge, we'll go ahead. But I'm going to be issuing challenges like this all throughout the course. And at the end of each app, I'm going to give you a kind of a list of things that you could do to potentially, take this app further if you want to continue your learning and continue challenging yourself. This is your last chance to pause. I'm moving on. 3, 2, 1. All right, let's go. So like I said, we're building this HStack of all these individual days. So again, back to our structure of our screen, right? We have the Z stack with the background of the color. On top of that color background, we have our overall VStack that holds, all of our items. Within that, we have our city text, and then we have our VStack that is our icon and temperature. So now we want to add an HStack down here for these days. So again, HStack. Okay, cool. But now remember, within that HStack, we're going to have 5 individual VStacks. So let's create our first one, and you'll see we'll just end up copying and pasting a lot before we refactor. We're going to refactor this, but we'll just do our VStack here. And again, remember, it's a text at the top because it's our days of the week. So let's just kind of build out the rudimentary version here first. So we'll say Tuesday, and then below that is our image, right? Because this is our SF symbol, same thing that we have up here, except, let's just copy and paste this. You'll see this happen a lot in SwiftUI actually. So we'll copy and paste that. And now our frame isn't going to be 180 by 180, right? That's huge. In fact, our frame is going to be 40 by 40 here. Now you may already be seeing how we could potentially reuse these views, right? Because it was the same thing as this image up here. However, the frame is just different. So you can imagine we could refactor this into its own view and just pass in our frame size, and then we could reuse it and resize it however we like. We may do that later, but that's something you may see as this code gets repetitive. Same thing here with our text of the temperature. Again, we're just going to copy and paste that down here. The difference here is our font. Font is not going to be 70. Here it's going to be 28. So there you go. So you can see it kind of starting to come together. However, we copied and pasted the image in the text because we'd already built that. We hadn't built our day of the week yet, so we're going to have to format this ourselves. So let's do that here. We have our font. Again, we'll do .system. size 16. And like I said, I'm kind of hard coding .medium our fonts right now. If you want to support dynamic type, you're not going to be hard coding this. And we'll give it the .foreground color of .white. And again, back to kind of this idea of refactoring, you can see a lot of the text we use, it has the same font weight, the same foreground color, the same font. The only difference is a size of 16. So you can see how you can make a custom text view that takes in a parameter of just the size. And now you have this white medium, font size text that you can use all throughout your app where you just pass in a font size. All right, so we have our VStack here built, which is the start of our HStack. That's just one. Now what I could do is literally do that, copy and paste this 5 times. But because our file's already getting long, and to be quite honest, my font's got to be big, so it's really hard to navigate around, we're actually going to refactor this part right now. We'll refactor the rest of the file in a later video. But in order to not copy and paste this chunk 5 times, let's do that now. So one cool thing you can do here is if you command click on the VStack, you get a bunch of different options, right? Embed and all this stuff here. Let's focus on the extract subview. So it kind of helps you refactor. So we're gonna hit extract subview. And now you see I get a struct down here below the content view. So this is its own standalone thing. If we wanted to, we could put this in its own file separate. We're not gonna do that right now, but we could if we wanted to. And it gives it the name extracted view because it doesn't know what we wanna name it. So let's call this weather day view. Now, let's look here. Remember, pretty much everything in Swift is a view. So weather day view has a variable called body and it returns a view. Like kind of drill that into your brain. We're gonna be talking about that a lot. Now to make this reusable, we have to pass in a couple variables. So let's just look at this weather day view by itself and see what we need. Okay, well, the day of the week needs to be passed in, right? It's not always gonna be Tuesday. So let's create that variable here. Var day of week, and that's going to be a string. So now that we have that, we can replace Tuesday with day of week. And then we're going to need the system name because not every day is going to be cloudy, sunny, right? Maybe it's rainy, maybe it's windy. So we're going to have to pass in the image name. So var image name, call that a string, or it is a string, not call it a string. And instead of that, we'll pass in image name. And you're going to see how we use this, how we're going to have to pass in this information. And then we're also going to need the temperature. And that is also a string. But actually, you know what? We're going to, even though we're not going to use it like this in this app fully, let's actually make this an int. And then that way, because like if we were getting this back from an API, I don't know, maybe it comes back as a string, but most, it's probably going to be an int if you have like temperature somewhere in your database. So here we can do instead of 76 degrees, we can do string interpolation based on temperature that we pass in, right? We're going to pass in an integer, but we're going to convert it to a string here. So now we have our reusable weather day view. So now when I create a weather day view, I have to pass in day of the week, I have to pass in image name, and I have to pass in temperature. So let's go ahead and make 5 weather day views up here on extracted view. So we'll do weather day view. It's going to take in, as you can see, I'm going to get that autocomplete back, day of week, image name, and temperature. So again, day of week, we'll start off with Tuesday for this one, image string. For now, let's just do the same that we have up here, the cloud sun fill. We'll go back and like make this some variety with temperatures, but we're just kind of testing this and getting our, the structure of our view in place. And like I said, sometimes the parameters can get long. I'd like to put return there. Now, if your parameters are getting like 4, 5, 6, 7 things, you can refactor that parameter it takes or all the properties it takes into its own, object that you can create elsewhere and just pass in the one object. So there's a little bit of a balancing act here. Usually 3 or 4 parameters I start to feel weird about. Anything over 4, I definitely want to refactor that so I'm not passing in like 10 different things. That's just personal code style preference. You don't necessarily have to do that. So again, let's say the temperature is 74 that we pass in. So let's hit resume up here. Again, sometimes your preview will stop. And you can see on our VStack here, we have Tuesday and 74 degrees with the same cloud sun fill that we did. So now let's copy and paste this 5 times. And again, if we had like a data model that had our days in an array, we could actually do this HStack, by passing in an array that would parse out all that data. We don't have that currently, so we're going to kind of do it the long way here. So again, here's our HStack with our 5 weather day views. Now, like I said, we just got the initial structure, but it's not quite right. It feels cramped up against the 76 degrees. So in between our VStack here, which is our main kind of image that you see here, we can put a spacer to push that down. And remember, spacer is going to push it all the way to the bottom. So we're going to do something here, right? So Well, it pushed it down. It didn't push it all the way down to the bottom because I forgot we have another spacer down here, right? So you can see the spacer is filling up the bottom and the spacer here is above that horizontal H stack, right? So you can see it kind of puts it in the middle. So that's the power of spacers, kind of like evening things out. The other thing here is you kind of notice they're kind of cramped together maybe. So just like VStack had the spacer or spacing parameter here, so does an H stack. I don't know, let's just play around. Again, this is how I come up with these numbers. Let's try 10. There you go, spread it out to 10. Man, that's a little, let's try 20. Oh, not 200. Let's see, 200 is a bit much. Okay, 20 looks about right. All right, so we're getting there. It's not quite perfect, but you can start to see it take shape. Before we mess with it too much, let's kind of get our individual data in there. So let's keep Tuesday the same, because right, Monday and Tuesday are probably gonna be similar. Let's start changing our days of the week. So Wednesday, we'll do this kind of like one property at a time here. Thursday, Friday, and then Saturday, right? So there's our days of the week going across the top. Now let's change our icons, right? We don't want it always to have the same weather. Like let's look at some different weather. And for that, let's go back to SF Symbols. So here we are in SF Symbols, and you can start to see, and feel free to pick any weather you want. You don't have to pick exactly what I pick. I'm gonna go with sun.maxfill, Command-Shift-C to copy that. And we'll go back to Xcode here, and I'm gonna paste that here, and you'll see it update like right away. So Command-V, bam, there you go. You see Wednesday, now sunny. I'm going to make Thursday windy. I don't know what that means, so let's go back to symbols. Here's wind and snow. Yeah, let's go wind and snow. It's quite drastic changes here in this climate. So Command-Shift-C to copy that. Back to Xcode, paste it here. There you go, a little snow and wind. Let's see what else we got here in SF Symbols. I'm going to go with this sunset here. Here, Command-Shift-C for sunset fill. And again, pick whatever you want. You don't have to do what I do. But you can kind of see this coming together, right? There's sunset fill, and then it's going to snow on Saturday. That's what we want, just flat out snow, right? It's getting to be that time of year. Actually, you know what? Let's go. Rain's not going to. This is the tricky thing about picking your background color, is that rain blue probably won't show up. So, maybe an issue we have to deal with later. Anyway, pick the snow. Come back here to the snowflake, Command-V. There you go. Now it's snowing on Saturday. Now let's change our temperatures just to kind of reflect that. It's going to be really hot on Wednesday. Let's say 88 degrees. Fahrenheit for those in the US here. Thursday is windy, it's going to cool down to 55. Friday is going to sunset, we'll say it's 60, right? And if it's snowing on Saturday, man, it's down to like 25 degrees. Quite a drastic change. But you can see our weather app is now starting to take shape. One thing you may notice is that we picked all the way back in the beginning, right? We picked white for our array. Well, now you can see that white is starting to clash with the white of our text. It makes it kind of hard to read. We can create a custom color because I think a lighter blue would look better, right? So at the top, we go from just the normal blue, and then at the bottom, we go to just a lighter blue. So that makes the gradient more subtle. So let's talk about how you can create your own custom colors. So over here in your XC assets, just like you were dropping in an image, down at the bottom, you can hit the plus button, hit color set, and then here we color, you do any appearance, dark appearance. This is for, light mode, dark mode. Let's do any appearance because we're not going to mess with dark mode in this current app. And bring out your toolbar on the right if it's gone. And here you can pick, your color gamut. You can pick whatever color you want here. So we're going to try to get a light blue. And I'm not going to have like an exact, value here. You can just see it changing colors up there and pick what you want. So we're going to go like very subtle light blue, and maybe a little more. We can test this out and see it. So, but the key here is when you click on color, you want to name it, right? So we'll say light blue, right? You can name it whatever you want. And usually in an app, you're going to have a lot of custom colors typically. So what I like to do is down here, hit plus, folder, create a folder called colors, change that, colors, and drag light blue into colors. That's all we're going to make for this one, but it's a good habit to get into. So back in our content view, now we have a color called light blue. Let's get rid of this side panel. We need the screen real estate. So instead of color here passing in .white, we can do color and then initialize that. And you see we can initialize that with a name. And here we're going to name it light blue, whatever you named your color, right? And let's do a Command-B to get this to run, because right now it looked like it put a gray down there. Oh, I got to hit resume on my preview. That's going to get you a lot. There you go. Now it's like a more subtle light blue. You can see it going from dark blue to light blue. Almost has like a teal feel to it. But our white colors stand out a little more. Maybe not much, but a little more. Now, if you look at our design, our H stack is not way down there, right? We got to have room for a button because we're going to be changing to day to night mode later. So instead of a spacer in between our H stack and our big weather temperature, let's delete that spacer and see what happens. So we're going to delete that. Bam, okay, it pushed it up. So it's a little cramped, obviously, right? It's cramped right up on there. But what we can do is we can put a padding bottom on our VStack here that has our huge icon and huge temperature, right? That would be this VStack right here. So we can do dot padding and pass in specifically on the bottom, dot bottom, and comma, we can give it a value. Again, this is where you just kind of dial it in. Say 40. Yeah, that looks about right. I mean, I literally just pulled that out of my butt, but yeah, that looks about right. And then you got the bottom down there. Now, of course, if we were going really deep into this and we had to, account for all the screen sizes, super small, you got to be a little more thorough. But again, this is the intro video, baby steps, right? But now you can see it's starting to be spaced out nicely and we have room for our button, which we're going to add in the next video. All right, so our UI is coming together. We're going to add the final piece, which is the button, just the UI of it. Then we're going to refactor. And then in the next video, I'm going to introduce state and how we can switch from night mode to dark mode and change things based on state and pass that state in a binding down to another view. We're going to start dipping our toes in passing data, keeping it very, very simple. But again, it's just the beginning. So let's get to it. All right, so down at the bottom here, again, remember this whole thing is a VStack, right, on our design. So the last piece of the VStack, I'm sorry, vertical stack V, is our button. So after the spacer that goes after our H stack, which is right here, I'm gonna make some room here. We're gonna create our button. And to do that, it's just button. And button takes in two pieces, right? You have this first kind of closure here, but then there's a second one. You do label, right? So the label, there's a couple different ways to initialize a button. This is what I found is the most common because this first section here is the action. It's what the button does, right? So we'll do right now, just print tapped. This is where we're going to change from day to night in our UI, but for now, button tapped. Label is what the button looks like, right? And it's kind of different from UIKit, where in UIKit, you're actually customizing the button itself. Well, here you just kind of get the functionality of a button and you can make it look however you like. So for example, our button label is actually going to be a text that says change daytime. You can name it whatever you want. And you can see we got our button down at the bottom. Now, what do you think we're going to put below that button to get it off the bottom of the screen? We don't want it down there, right? We're going to put a spacer down there. So one more spacer. Now, something you need to keep in mind when building spacers on and I'm curious if I'll run into it. No, on all these views is a spacer counts as a view. And one restriction on purpose of Swift UI is that in this whole Z stack, right? In the overall view, you can only have 10 views. As soon as you put in your 11th view, Xcode is going to yell at you and say, you can't do this, right? So if we count ours, we have our gradient background view, cool. We have our V stack, right? Now, nested stuff doesn't count, right? So linear gradient view is 1. Our V stack with our big icon is 2. Our H stack with our days is 3. The spacer's 4, the button is 5, and this last spacer is 6. Okay, so we're well below the 10, no big deal. But something when I was learning Swift UI that I kept running into is, I'll admit my mistakes, right? I was overusing spacer, right? And you could argue I'm even overusing it here too. And I was hitting that like 10 view limit a lot. So something to keep in mind, spacers are great, but you can easily kind of overuse them and kind of run into trouble there. And real quick, the solution to that 10 view limit is to refactor your views, right? Refactor it out into another H stack here, refactor it out into its own separate V stack, So there's easy ways around it through composition. So I don't want you to think that like it's super limiting. It's to prevent you from creating like Swift UI's version of massive view controller. You don't create massive view, right? It forces you to kind of refactor that. So anyway, now that we put our spacer down here at the bottom, you can see our button is up higher. But we just have the default button layout, right? We don't want that. We got to make this look pretty good, right? So first thing I'm going to do is give it a frame. And the width is 280. And this is just 280 by 50 is kind of like my go-to button frame. And you can see the red outline down there of what it is. And to be honest with you, that's kind of like the typical default Apple button nowadays, right? It stretches out the screen. It's pretty thick, easy to tap. So now you can see our frame. Let's give our frame a background color. Dot background. And that's going to be color dot white. Right, there we go. So there's our button. And let's actually, I like a big bold font on my buttons. Personal preference. You don't have to do this one if you don't want to. So we'll do font. And again, we'll do dot system, hard code it. And we'll say 20 of dot bold and design.default. There you go. So nice big chunky bold font. And then the The final piece of the puzzle here is rounded corners, which you can't see because of this red outline, but if I click somewhere else, right, you see it's a very blocky button. Again, I go for the default Apple look, get a little bit of a corner radius. So the modifier for corner radius is corner radius, dot corner radius. And real quick, it may seem like there's tons of modifiers and it's going to be impossible to memorize those. However, there's a group of them that are very, very, very common that you're going to like frame, font, background color, corner radius. You'll get very familiar with those. But, you know, I could go through modifier by modifier, making a video for each one. I feel like that's kind of a waste of time. You'll learn and you'll pick those up over time as you use them. So let's make this corner radius 10. And if I get rid of that red square, now you can see our nice Apple default looking button. So our UI, without the whole night mode stuff, is done. Great. What'd you think? How'd that go? Right? Not so bad. Again, I went very quick, but we're going to dive into a bunch of different apps. We're going to do this over and over again. I'm very confident you'll have the hang of the UI part at the end. Because if I'm being honest, like the UI part, the HStacks, the VStacks, like that's kind of the easy and fun part of Swift UI. It's the passing the data that really trips people up. So that's what I want to focus on. But anyway, UI is done. Let's start refactoring this thing. So let's start from the top. And my big disclaimer here is Swift UI is so early. How you structure, how you refactor, how you compartmentalize your code. Like a lot of us iOS developers are still trying to figure out best practices. So I'm kind of figuring out the way I like to organize. I will, give the disclaimer that if you ask me in 2 years, I'll probably be a little different. Best practices will be established. However, I do think this initial way is a good way to start. And then hopefully you and your learnings can evolve as the Swift UI best practices evolve. You're just super early that hasn't really been established yet. So starting with the linear gradient, we're just going to create a view called background view, right? So command click, and you can see the extract subview down here. So now we just have extracted view. Let's go down to our struct here at the bottom. You see we got our extracted view that we just kind of did that. Well, I'll do the next one manually so you can see how both work. Because to be honest with you, sometimes that extract subview is a little wonky and it doesn't work all the time. So I usually end up doing it manually anyway, but I wanted to show you that. So we'll probably do the rest of them manually. But let's call this background view here. And okay, let's talk about what we want to pass in here. Because if you look at the design here, night mode has a different gradient. So we want to be able to pass in the different colors, right? So we want to pass in, blue and light blue or whatever the colors we need. So we probably need variables here, right? So var, call it top color, and that is a color that we pass in. And let's call var bottom color, and that's a color that we pass in. And then let's replace this with bottom color, top color. Top color goes first, top color, bottom color. There you go. So now that view is refactored, and we will now replace, all that up here with, instead of extracted view, let's call it background view. And I'm going to tell you why here as soon as I'm done with this, why this is helpful and makes things more readable here. Okay, looks like I lost my autocomplete here. Let's see what's going on with background view. Okay, silly mistake here. This is the problem when you're kind of like talking while coding. So I put variables inside the variable called body. You cannot do that. So what needs to happen, as you saw that we did up here with weather day view, those variables and properties need to be on the struct itself, not in the view. So I put them in the wrong spot because I was talking and explaining, kind of half paying attention. So now if we do Command B, that should be all good down here. We still got build failed because our code is messed up at the top, but background view here is now good to go now that the properties are on the outside. Small little misstep there. So background view, that explains why I wasn't getting my initializers here. So let's try to type that again. My habit, like if I don't get the autocomplete, I don't feel good about it, right? So I like to make sure I get that autocomplete. So background view down here, and there you go, top color, bottom color. So let's pass in dot blue, and pass in color with the initializer of a name called light blue. And even though this may seem like it didn't save a lot of lines of code and is very similar to what we just did, well, one, you're going to see the flexibility we introduce when we go to like night mode, but two, it just makes your screen read a lot nicer, right? Background view, top color, blue, bottom color, light blue. Cool, pretty simple. You get that. And then as you rename your other views that you refactor, your screen is going to read quite nicely. All right, let's keep it moving. Here, this text, we have our city name. So we'll copy, and then now we're gonna start doing this manually here. For now, I'm gonna put all these in the same file. I'll talk about project organization after we get it refactored and how we move stuff around. That'll come in a little bit. So let's do struct. We'll call this city text view, and it conforms to view. And then if you just type var body, you'll get the autocomplete. So body some view, there you go. That's the same structure. And now if you look here, if we want to make our city text a little bit reusable, we just need to pass in the text, right? The city name. So here, the variable on city text view can just be var city name. That is a string. And because I've already copied that text view, I can come down here, do paste, right? So instead of Cupertino, we can just do city name. And now this is reusable. So back up, and then now you're gonna start to see the readability here. So instead of just this glob of text, city, text view, and pass in the city name, and now we can do Cupertino, California. Hope I spelled that right. We'll see. Hit resume on our preview just to make sure. I always like to do that a lot. Do a Command B to make sure everything is all good, and looks like we're good. Nothing changed. But now you can see how our screen is reading a bit better. So now let's refactor out this VStack that is our main kind of weather. So again, I'm going to copy this, and down here at the bottom, we'll create another struct. Again, this is kind of probably starting to get repetitive, but you'll see that all this repetition is really going to help you learn how all this stuff works. And this is the first step of this, right? Because right now we're just refactoring out the views, but eventually when we're passing data around, we got to make sure these views have all the correct data. So I want to make sure you understand how to refactor these views before we add the more complex step to it, right? So we'll call this main weather status view. Naming's hard. If you don't like that name, name it whatever you like. That's fine. So here's what I like to do here. First, we'll do var body. Before I do my variables, I like to paste what I copied in there, right? I copied and pasted this, and by looking at this, I can see what variables I need, right? Like I'm going to need an image name, right? Because it's not always going to be cloud sun fill. So var image name, and that's a string. Cool. Now I can plug in image name here, and it looks like my temperature is going to be dynamic. So same thing we did up here with the weather day view. Temperature is an int, so I'm going to copy that. I mean, you could type it out if you like, but I'm going to paste that. Looks like I forgot to copy the v. All good. So var temperature is an int, and again, just like we did before, very similar. String interpolation, temperature. Cool. So again, now up here in our view, clean this up a bit. We can get rid of this VStack and just call this main weather status view. Completion here, string. We want the image name to be cloud, and I'm just looking down here to remember what it was. Cloud.sun.fill, and the temperature 76, right? And again, if it gets too long, feel free to bring your variables down like that. I like to do that. Okay, cool. So now let's make sure, do Command B. I always, again, Command B after I refactor, make sure everything's good, make sure my preview's right. Cool, again, now you're starting to see the readability. I have a ZStack with a background view. Now I have a VStack with the city text view, the main weather status view. A new developer coming into this screen is gonna really know what's going on based on how you structured your refactor here. Now this is where a debate could come in, and I do think you can take what I've been doing, I do think you can take that too far. So there's like a balancing act. For example, I kind of think leaving this HStack, even though it takes up a lot of code, right? Remember the goal is not to be like, let me get my content view to 3 lines of code, right? Because oftentimes getting it that short makes it a little hard to like understand. I kind of think that leaving this HStack, if we didn't have an array with our data and passing an array, that's a totally different thing. If you're familiar with Swift UI, you know what I'm talking about. But in this circumstance, I think this makes it very clear what this is on the UI, right? Because you have 5 weather day views. It's pretty straightforward what's going on here. Yes, it is an extra 10, 15 lines of code that you could refactor out. But again, getting down to 3 lines of code is not the goal. Making it easy to read and understand is the goal. So I'm going to leave that there. I'm going to leave this spacer here. And one thing I like to do with my buttons here, well, first get rid of the space. I don't like that. So I'm going to refactor this text out into a button. And I do this with my buttons because, again, this is like a default looking button, right? You're probably going to use this type of button all throughout your app. So again, let's create another struct down here at the bottom. And like I mentioned, we're going to do some project organization next. These can be in separate files, but I'm putting them all here for now. So not var, struct. Let's call this weather button. And I just like to kind of put like what type of app it is. Usually it's just like SA button you may have seen in my previous videos for Sean Allen button, or GF button for GitHub followers button in my previous course. So I like to put something about the app in the beginning of it. That is a view. And again, var body some view, you're going to type that 1,000 times. You'll be very used to that. And again, I paste in here to see what variables I need. Okay, so let's look. So I'm going to need a title, that's for sure. So var title, it's my button title, that's a string. So let's change this here to title and zoom up here. Now, I'm probably going to want to change the background color and most likely the foreground color as well. But you see, I don't have foreground color here. So let's do type foreground color, just put in .blue for now. That's what it is as the default. But let's actually make these variables here. So var, let's say text color, just to make it very clear. That is going to be a color. And then background color, also a color, right? So instead of background being color.white, it's going to be background color. Nope. Kind of the perils of naming your stuff close to the default stuff here. And then text color, right? So on our weather button, we're going to pass in a title, text color, background color. That makes it so I can reuse this button in a lot of different contexts here. So again, up here, instead of this button, we're going to do weather button. And then we're going to pass in the 3 parameters, right? Title is change day time. Text color is .blue. And background color is .white. And again, you can leave it 1 line if you want. My text is so big here that I'll put that on 3. So again, now you can see our button, what it does. It's just going to print something for now. We're going to fix that. It's a weather button with the text, title, color, background color. So that's reusable. So that is like our very first pass at refactoring. So you can see how to extract the views into their own struct, which again, I have the whole list of them down here, right? The weather day view, the background view, city text view, weather status view. Now, when it comes to organization, I want to talk about this. I'm not actually going to create new files and move them around. But again, like this is a standalone struct as an example, weather button. Like actually, you know what? I am going to do that. I lied to you. Little ad lib on the fly. So I'm going to do Command N in the Swift weather, do a new Swift file, hit next, call this weather button. And the reason I'm doing this for weather button is because, like I said, weather button is the type of thing that you are going to use all throughout your app, right? That's very reusable. Your buttons should all look the same or similar. So that is something I want out of this file and outside of it, right? Now, if I do a Command B, well, it's going to say, oh, I didn't import Swift UI. Import Swift UI. I copied and pasted over some important stuff. And you see invalid redeclaration. That's fine. That's expected. That is because I still have it here. But once I delete that there, done. So again, on the topic of project organization, as that example, if a view that I've refactored out is going to be used all throughout the app and elsewhere, definitely I put that in its own file. However, if a view is very unique and specific to the current screen that I'm on, but I just refactored it out to make my screen more readable and easy to understand, like you see here, then I keep that in the same file, right? So you get that distinction. If it's unique to this screen, I recommend keeping it in the same file because it's easy to find, less confusing. If it's going to be used all over your app or in other screens of your app, put that off into another file. All right, so that's the refactor. In the next video, we're going to dip our toes into actually passing data. It'll be pretty simple, but you'll get to start seeing how SwiftUI handles view updates based on a source of truth with data. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go to the next video. We left off last video with a bit of refactoring and dipping our toes into project organization, which we'll get more in depth later. In this video, we're going to introduce the passing of the data and changing from day to night, like you see in this video, based on a Boolean, and start talking about state in SwiftUI. All right, back to our code, our weather day view that we refactored. Let's go back up to the top. Let's add what's called a state variable, and I'll give you the quick explanation. But like I said, the bulk of this course is going to focus on, at state, at binding, at state object, at observable object, passing the data. So this is like just the very first steps of it. So don't get me wrong, this took me a long time to wrap my head around all the data flow in SwiftUI. So in this app, if you leave this being like, I have no idea what's going on, don't worry, we're going to hammer this home over the next couple apps and throughout the rest of the course. So state private var is night, and that's going to equal false by default, right? So do Command B to get rid of any errors here. Okay, so big picture, again, we'll drill down later. The way SwiftUI works is you don't directly update UI. You tell some source of truth, some piece of data. In this example, that source of truth data is this Boolean is night. So you set up your UI to handle if is night is true and if is night is false. And you can imagine we're going to change our background color based on is night true or false. So your UI is waiting for that change. And when that change happens, your UI is like watching that source of truth And when that change happens, your UI will change. Like it's reacting to it, right? It's declarative programming versus imperative programming. I have a whole video in the next section all about that, but that's big picture, keeping it simple. So what we need to do is set up our UI to handle both cases. Like what happens if isNight is true and isNight is false, okay? So what we're going to do is just change the top color and bottom color on our gradient view. If you're familiar with ternary operators, we can do isNight, and then if it's true, we'll do dot black. And if it's false, we'll do dot blue, right? That's just for our top color. And then for the bottom color, because this is going to get too long, again, let's put our parameters on a separate line here. So same thing, isNight, and it's going to be dot gray if it's true. And if night is false, it's going to be light blue. So if isNight is false, it's going to look just like we have it here. However, if isNight is true, we're going to change it to black and gray. So let's try this out here. Down in our button, remember we just did button tapped. Now we're actually going to flip that Boolean. So we can do isNight dot toggle. So no, not custom mirror. What are you doing, Xcode? Toggle. All right. So now when I tap the button, it's going to just toggle from true to false. And based on that, our UI is going to be watching it and it's going to adjust our background gradient accordingly, right? So you can either run this on your device if you want, run it on the simulator, or the nice thing about previews, if you hit this play button and you'll see the background will change to this like grayish blue kind of thing, that means your app is like actually running and you can interact with it. So watch what happens when I tap the change daytime button. Bam, now it's into night, just like that. So what's happening is right now isNight equals true. When I tap this, isNight equals false. And now my UI knows that that source of truth of data changed and then it updates accordingly. Now let's make some small tweaks here. So if I go back to night, well, it's still sunny and cloudy at night. Well, that's a little weird. So let's go to our main weather status view. And the same thing we can do here, right? We can do isNight. If isNight is true, we don't want cloud sun fill. We want moon stars fill, right? You see it here? Or you can do just moon or whatever you want. Who cares, right? Sparkles, whatever you want to put in there. I'm going to do moon stars fill. Back to Xcode. Do Command V to paste that in there. So now if isNight is true, we're going to show the moon. If it's false, we're going to show the cloud sun. Hit change daytime. And you'll notice I didn't have to stop my preview and restart it, right? It's hot reloading the code. So this is the nice thing about previews when they work. But you see now when we're going from day to night, we're also changing the icon back and forth, right? So that's pretty cool. So that is the very, very basics of how Swift's data flow works. Again, you have a source of truth, your data model, and when that changes, your UI updates. Now the trick is making sure you set up your UI properly and making sure the UI is, listening to the right stuff to update. And you got to make sure your model objects is publishing its information. You got to make sure like things are listening. So that's kind of the tricky part of it. Again, we'll get to that. One last thing, right? So we covered state. Now let me give you, I'm going to dive into this later, but real quick, the reason you put state variable in front of it is if you're familiar with your structs versus classes like Swift 101, structs are value types. So they don't hold state, right? They get destroyed and recreated. So how can you make a struct hold state? Well, that's what this state property wrapper is for, right? So if you can imagine this view called content view is just a struct and it gets created and destroyed all the time, created and destroyed. That's what Swift UI is all about. Very cheap views that get created and destroyed, redrawn all the time. However, this little piece of this view called isNight, this little piece of data, this Boolean, has state in front of it. So that means that gets put off somewhere else to keep that state while the rest of the view is constantly created and destroyed. This keeps state. So super basic explanation, but hopefully your mind is starting to see how like Swift UI works a little bit. Okay, so now onto that final piece I'm going to talk about. We're going to refactor background view even more so we don't have to this is kind of like messy and it's going to introduce binding. Okay, so let's go down to our background view. Okay, so we don't want to use this. We don't want to pass in a top color and a bottom color. We want to pass in var is night, and that is a bool. Now, this isNight needs to keep state like we just talked about, right? It needs to always know, am I day, am I night, what am I showing? Because again, this view could get recreated and destroyed. Now this isNight variable always needs to match this isNight variable, right? Because it's the same thing, right? This view is a child of that view, right? We're passing this isNight variable down the view hierarchy to the children. So they need to be the same at all times, right? So that's what binding is for. So if I put binding in front of at here, so binding var is night. And then we're going to have to do that logic here where is night. This is what we just did before. Dot black if is night is true. If is night is false, we do dot blue. And then let's delete top color because we're done there. And same thing with bottom color. Again, is night. If that's true, we're going to use for the bottom color dot gray. If it's false, color initializer name. Remember, this is exactly what we did up top. You could even copy and paste it if you like. So that way, every time we use our background view, like right here, every time we use background view, if we're using this, all throughout the app, we would have to pass in these kind of colors. Well, now background view just takes in a binding, right? Is night, but you can see it's not just a bool, right? It's a binding bool. So I can't just put is night, right? Because it's not binding. Because down here in the background view, I specifically said this needs to be binding. And again, what binding does is makes it so my is night variable on my background view is always the same as this is night variable, right? So to do that, you put a $sign in front of it. So that makes it binding. So now I'm passing into my background view a binding to is night, right? And then now here, so that means on my background view, this is night is always going to be the same as this is night. That's what binding does. So back down in the background view, we should be good to go here. And then again, it's just a little cleaner up here. Just background view is night, you pass in is night. So let's stop this just to be sure, rerun the preview. And now if we do this, it should work the same. Yep, it works the same. And that's a very basic example. I just wanted to introduce the concept of binding and how when passing it down, that's the key, passing it down the view hierarchy to the children, right? Because the background view here in this circumstance is a child of the content view, right? It's part of the content view. So we can pass the binding down the view hierarchy. Now, in more complex apps, you could imagine like you could be passing a binding down 6 views down the view hierarchy to use it. There's other ways, things like the environment, we'll get into that later. But again, this is the basic introduction of state and binding. Those are the 2 most basic ways to pass data. We're going to be doing that a lot throughout the rest of the apps, but this is your introduction. So that finishes off this weather app. I want to leave you with some challenges that you can take this app and go even further with it. Another challenge, and this is more towards those who have experience building Swift apps, create a data model that you don't have to individually pass in this stuff, right? You can have an array of like a day, right? And a day would have, a day of the week, a temperature, an image name, or maybe a weather enum that you pass in that has the specific image attached to it. You can make this neat and represent a data model that's a bit more, it's not advanced. It's kind of basic iOS knowledge. But if you are like a super beginner just learning Swift UI, that may be above it. But if you have app experience, you should be able to do that. So that'd be a good challenge. And then if you really want to take this far, create a network call from a basic weather API that will take whatever city you want and it'll actually give you the next 5 days of weather. That's taking it pretty far, but my goal here is to give you the basis of an app that you can tweak yourself, build upon,